Hey everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn. I'm joined by the fantastic Jeremy Lord, and we would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today, and we'd also like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Here we are, part 2 with Jeremy Lord. How you doing, Jeremy?
Good, man. How are you guys?
I'm very good, thank you. We've got Johanna looking after us in chat. Having a lot of computer game talk backstage before everything got started. Having a great time. Really keen to kind of get stuck into part 2. Before we do that, if you're watching on YouTube live, come over and say hello at Behance. We'd love to hear from you. It's always great to see who's watching and say hello and all that sort of stuff. You can ask questions, all that sort of thing. But I also have here a campaign that's happening at the moment, Spring into Fearless. It's a year of the tiger, and there's a bit of a competition. So this is slightly updated to the version that we showed on Tuesday. So not only is there a campaign, but for certain residents in certain regions around Asia Pacific, there's also a competition happening. So you can win a Creative Cloud subscription, 1-year subscription, and also $1,000 to do with what you will. So maybe you can put some money into your Genshin Impact account and re-roll whatever you like to become epic. So check that out. Johanna will share a link in chat. It's also in the episode description. So if you're watching the on-demand on YouTube, there'll be a link there and you can check it out. It's happening for a couple of weeks. Obviously, check out the terms and conditions to make sure that you're eligible. But even if you're not, you can still create your Year of the Tiger artwork and use the hashtag there, and we'll see it and we'll check it out. We'd love to see what you create. But yeah, without further ado, should we kind of rewind, give people a bit of a background of what we did on Tuesday, and go from there? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good.
Okay, so Tuesday we kind of started from scratch, and like real scratch. And we just basically went into some quite sort of basic ideas of how to sketch out these forms and get this kind of like cute, kind of a little bit short and cute kawaii anime kind of manga character of a tiger looking a little bit fearless, doing this kind of like power pose. And basically we just kind of looked at this idea of, creating very, very basic shapes and getting something that's going to be really easy to, what's going on? I'm using the eraser. That's never a good idea. That happens more frequently than I'd like to admit. Just making these kind of like basic shapes like this and creating something real simple for you to kind of work with and get the pose right and get all that kind of stuff. So we spent a fair bit of time actually getting this pose right, moving things around. We played as well with a few different kind of ideas of how to, what's the expression on the face. So we put it to kind of chat looking at, is it this one? Is he looking kind of like mean and ready to rumble? Or is it something a little bit more friendly? And kind of chat voted on the slightly bigger, more kind of anime eyes, which I personally love.
Yeah, and it made a big difference, didn't it? Like even just a couple of different, like really slight changes. Like it really changes the whole impact of everything, just from the expression, like everything that's happening just here. Like it's quite amazing, like how big an impact that can have.
Yeah, and like again, like putting them side by side, like the difference in even just kind of like how you read the pose on this one compared to the other one. Like there's a lot more kind of like this one, the more angry one is ready to kind of like fight and he's a bit more aggressive, whereas the other one is a little bit more kind of like, a little bit more of a friendly challenge than a full-on kind of like KO type business. And then we started putting in some gear and kind of playing around with, like what do we add in? What do we do here? And so I kind of added in this like cyberpunk elements in here, getting all the clothing down. That's always like a fair bit of fun for me, kind of playing like dress up with my characters and
Yeah.
seeing like what do I give them? What do I make them do? Usually leads to a few different versions. And then in between Tuesday and today, I've added in just this Korean type. So I've had to kind of source this on the side, obviously. I don't speak Korean. I don't know how to write it, but this is what Google tells me is the way to write tiger in Korean. So please forgive me if it's not the way. Blame Google. Don't blame me. But yeah, adding a little bit of type in there just to kind of like hold it in together. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at some kind of basic inking principles, and just adding in, cleaning up the line, adding in some nice black, clean inking lines. Then we'll color it up, add in a little bit of shading, and that'll probably be us for the full hour.
That's awesome. Well, as always, we'll see how far we get. So we're here for like the hour. So,
Yep.
yeah, well, that's super cool. I kind of get the sketching part all the time. Like when we have people like with your talent here, I'm like, okay, cool, I get that. Like obviously years and decades of like practice gets you there, and that's why mine doesn't look like yours, that kind of thing. But then you kind of get to the inking stage, and as it starts coming together, I'm always kind of like, oh wow, it seems so simple in theory, like in practice, but it's such a wow factor. Like I know where we're going to get in the next like 20 minutes, and I'm always like, wow, it just looks so crisp and clean, and the colors and the lines are perfect and all that stuff.
Well, I think this is why it's also interesting to see this kind of stuff, right? To see like this is literally how it started to begin with, like literally just kind of stumps for legs, and like just a big kind of tubby ball for the chest. And then the gear makes that kind of happen. But we spoke about this on Tuesday as well, actually, this idea that like this is probably still a little bit too rough for my liking in terms of inking. Like I've still left a lot for the inking to do here.
Right.
And ideally, like you don't want to do that. Like in a comic book scenario, typically there will be a person whose job it is to ink up the sketches from someone else. If those sketches come like this, the inker isn't necessarily the one kind of creating the characters. They won't know, like, did you mean for this hair to be like that? Did you mean for like, what's this line here? Am I drawing this line in here? Like this line that I've left in from the structure of this kind of fist here, which is just this
Right.
big ball. Like, am I drawing that in? I don't know. Like, I didn't create this artwork.
Because you didn't do the sketch, right?
Exactly. So like, I think, without having to go that far of like, this needs to be basically finished and somebody can just trace over it. Doesn't need to go that far. But there's still a lot of stuff here that's kind of been left for me to figure out at the inking phase, which is doable, but it's just a little bit more of a pain in the butt. So these are the kind of things that I'm kind of trying to train myself to like not get too eager and jump into the inking, because we all want to move forward with the artwork and like make it like start to look cool and not just a big sketch. So first step here would be, obviously these are all grouped. So I'm just going to drop the opacity down of this so I can kind of see what I'm doing. Create a new layer and call it inking.
As you're doing that, we've got our first question from Michael. Hey, Michael, thanks for the question. Jeremy, I know you spoke briefly about using blue for your drafts. Is this something you discovered on your own or something you learned from someone or somewhere?
This is definitely something that I learned from someone. I started when I graduated, when I finished high school, I actually wanted to go into animation. And I started animation where most of the work is done in blue pencil. The reason for the basic kind of animation work being done in blue pencil is kind of twofold. Is when you go over, like if I boost the opacity back up on this, if I come over this with a black line, that black line will stand out a lot more than the blue line, right? So I can kind of see what I'm doing more. I've dropped the opacity down just because it increases that kind of thing and gets out of the way a little bit. But one of the kind of the secret reasons why people used to use blue is because the cameras that they use, the line testers that they used, like you'd have your drawing down here with the like traditional kind of animation peg bar, which is the other way around actually, dot, line, line. And there'd be like a camera on top of that kind of like shooting that. Traditionally, those were in black and white. And when you shoot that, you could actually do your pencil your blue pencil line work on this drawing and then come over with a regular gray or black pencil. And because it was black and white, the value, the tonal value of the blue was the same as the paper. And so literally on a black and white screen, that blue would disappear. So you wouldn't even have to erase it at all. So that's one of those kind of like less of a, obviously not a stylistic thing, even though now it kind of looks cool and it's blue and pink and those are the colors that I like to work with. So there's a bit of this kind of like stylist effect going on there, but it's mostly just a necessity thing that somebody has discovered. Blue for animation and characters, red usually for layout and perspective and kind of those kind of things, similar ideas. But yeah, that's kind of the reason for the blue. Now I just kind of like it being blue, really.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, great answer and great question. Thanks for the question, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. So this is where, again, I'd start inking. Now, in the past, those of you guys who have seen my streams know that I tend to be quite sort of careful and very like meticulous and maybe a little bit anal when doing my lines. And I like to avoid like this kind of thing, like this, like lobby kind of tip of a stroke. Like I like my lines to be a little bit more tapered. I'm actually kind of moving more and more away from that these days. I still kind of like a smooth line, but after kind of a few years of doing that, it's a little bit of a pain to do, but it's also like starting to feel like it just kind of takes away from the fact that this is actually a drawing. Like it's nice that you can still see, the line work and the kind of the mistakes, if you will, even though they're not quite sort of like mistake is not really the right word for it. But it's nice to be able to see, the work that's gone into it and how that has happened. So normally like things like this would be like cardinal sin for me, right? Like this, no way,
right.
That's where it go. And I'm starting to be just a little bit like, you know what, that's fine. That's just part of like the flavor of the piece. And it just makes it look a little bit more kind of like natural and people can kind of see how that all looks. So I'm trying to be a little bit less kind of, careful and really just making super smooth kind of vectory looking artwork and going for something a little bit more kind of natural. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So if you see me kind of erase something and do it a bunch of times, let me know. And
that's why.
I'll definitely fall into that habit again for sure. Yeah, so let's get the eyes in, because the eyes are definitely going to be something that's going to give this guy a lot more expression. This black on top. And again, like you saw, I didn't have this last time, but like having this reference here, I was wondering what a baseball looks like. Turns out I haven't used it, but this is definitely going to help me with the kind of coloring of the tiger. And tigers always have that black around the eye, which really makes it kind of stand out. So that's going to be something that is going to be probably the first thing to go in here and get that eye looking nice and kind of tigery. There we go. So again, like, in the past, this is where like anybody who's watched these streams before, or who's even like watched any of my time lapses will know that I'll do these lines over and over again because I'm trying to get them right and smooth in one go, when it's really like, it's okay, I think. And it's like, it's a big kind of shift to do of like, letting go of this. It's fine. It's fine as it is.
You sound like you're still trying to convince yourself at the same time.
Well, it is. I mean, it's definitely something that, like, I hate the word because it's a little bit kind of pretentious, but like perfectionism and stuff, like there's definitely some like downsides to that for sure. Like if you're just spending, like 80% of the time that you could be doing on the artwork is spent just like massaging one particular line to get it to be perfect. Like there's definitely a fine line there. There's a point where it may be just like, it's fine, dude, just move on. It's cool. But it's also can be a bit of a dangerous, a bit of a slippery slope, because then it's like it's not a far cry from like it's fine to just making crap and being like it's fine. Like you
like
still
close enough is good enough kind of thing.
yeah, like it's nice to also like care enough about the artwork that you want to make it good. But also just remember that you also you're here to make an artwork. So like make sure that you actually make the artwork and not just spending hours just doing one part of the artwork over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Hey, we got another question. So again from Michael. Thanks, Michael. Thanks. He says thanks for answering the question before. Follow up to what you mentioned about leaving high school, wanting to go into animation. What sent you on that path? Don Bluth, so I'm going to get these names wrong. Miyazaki. I hope
Hmm.
you know who these people are because I don't. And
Oh,
Kat
you know
Churio.
Miyazaki.
Do I?
Yeah, Miyazaki, Ghibli Studios.
Oh, I do know that.
Yeah.
Phew.
Um,
Good save. Thank you.
so yes, I was actually fortunate enough in high school to go to high school. One of my mates is a guy called Max Keen, whose father, if you're into animation, you will know this name for sure. His father is Glenn Keane, who is one of the lead animator for Disney and has been now for a few years.
Was that
Um,
Glenn Keane?
yeah, Glenn Keane. So he's the guy, like, take basically any of the main characters for Disney movies, animations, in between, like, I don't know, let's say like 95 and probably like 2010. And he's the guy behind it. So he's the guy who did The Beast. He's the guy who did Aladdin. And when I'm talking about that, what I mean by that is like he's the guy who designed and animated those characters on screen.
Oh, wow.
So when you're watching those animations, you're seeing his work. And so his son was in my class, and we kind of became friends. And so obviously, like he started kind of like telling us about art, and he was definitely the first person to kind of introduce this idea to me that like art can be a living.
Mm,
Um, and so kind of naturally from there went into um, animation because obviously that's where he was going with his work. So, yeah, that's more just kind of just like a happy set of circumstances than potentially a real decision. I did a year of animation and then just started having a look at graphic design and kind of expanding the horizons a little bit and seeing what else was out there.
that's cool.
And then eventually kind of got into illustration through kind of an organic process of working for branding agencies and doing a lot of illustration and finding out that that's what I like to do. Um, yeah.
Nice. I'm going to bring that up here. So I'm just showing that at the same time. So yeah, like Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas.
Yep.
Wow, that's really cool. Ariel. Wow,
Yep.
that's cool. Well, there you go. Some homework.
And I think now just working for himself, one of his recent projects, I think, which he won an Oscar for actually, was Dear Basketball, the Kobe Bryant um, retirement letter to basketball. I don't know if anybody's seen that.
I haven't seen
If you
that. No.
haven't, really recommend it. It's just called Dear Basketball, and it's narrated by Kobe Bryant, kind of like writing a kind of like a goodbye love letter to basketball upon his retirement. Um, and it's all animated by Glenn Keane, and it's
Oh wow.
just amazing, absolutely amazing. Um, okay, cool. So this is basically again, this is the very basic inking process here. Like, still have a lot of stuff to figure out with this. So like, you want to try and avoid as much as possible leaving things for this stage of the process of like, I haven't drawn this hand yet at all. Um, so you can kind of just do this and not necessarily like turn your brain off, but you're not like, this is not the point where you should be like figuring out what the drawing looks like. This is the point where you clean up the drawing and kind of like finalize it. This is not the time for like concept making, if you will.
Right.
There are things that you will pick up on, like for instance, the These guys are mostly fine. All these kind of paws here on this hand are mostly okay for me to just use as is. But there is an issue with this one over here. This guy here is not okay. So that's definitely going to have to be a fix, which, sometimes I will go back on the sketch phase because it might be easier for me to fix on the sketch phase than doing it in inking, because it's just an easier brush to use, and it's less kind of like, making it kind of clean and worrying about how it looks on the final. So that's definitely like not going to work here. So this guy would probably have to do that
Right. So you've
instead
done
to
it in the
make it look
sketch, and
like
then
this.
but once you
Yeah,
get to this point and you're really kind of finalizing these lines, because these are going to be final lines in the artwork, and you sort of
yeah,
discover a little bit more detail, like using a thicker brush, and it's going to be permanent. And you're like, oh, actually, it doesn't seem quite right at this stage, and so
totally.
you need to be open to making adjustments kind of on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like minor adjustments, right? But
Yeah.
definitely things to think about like that don't make sense. Like again, if I was drawing like this, if I did it the way I did it in the sketch straight up, then this finger is not really holding the handle of that bat. It's like kind of digging into it. So it doesn't really make sense. So things like that
Mm.
need to go. You should also be careful of things like this right here, right? Up close, that's not a big deal. From a distance, it might start to look like his kind of jowls or his mustache or whatever that name is on a tiger. Um, is the same line. Like your eye kind of creates this illusion there. So they're
Right.
not really good things to keep in there. So I try and avoid those as much as possible. Sometimes that means like tough luck and you just got to redraw stuff. Um, Hopefully that's not the case today. And we can just do this. And then I can kind of cheat. There we go. That's a bit better.
Nice. Someone was chatting about this would make a great sticker. You've made stickers in the past. Like,
I have, yeah.
what would what qualifies as a sticker worthy piece for you?
I think usually like the fact that there's a circle behind this makes it a good sticker. Like it's just a good piece that's, like it's got a relatively easy shape to understand and kind of move forward with. It's not too complicated. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Um, yeah, I think something like that it usually kind of makes a good sticker, just like a nice kind of comfortable shape to work with.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, but this probably definitely could be a sticker. So we're going to move on from here. So again, like the process would just be me spending more and more time with this and kind of fixing it up. So what I've done is I've kind of done that classic kind of like MasterChef trick where it's like, oh, here's what I prepared earlier. And I've actually gone and inked up the whole thing, minus, as you can see, the fixed paw here is still kind of like a little bit busted. So what I can do is I can take this guy and go take that, Command J for duplicate, hide this guy, bring this guy back up, lower the opacity on him a little bit so I can kind of see what I'm doing, and then essentially just kind of graft the new finger on the old one. So I've dropped the opacity of that one just so I can kind of see what I'm erasing here, right? And I can see what I'm doing
Mm.
in that way, so it doesn't become too much of a mess. And I can literally just kind of graft them back onto each other. And then I've got something that's fixed without necessarily having to redraw. So as much as we're kind of talking about this idea of like, don't be afraid to redraw things and all that kind of stuff, you also want to make sure that you're not doing unnecessary work.
Cool. Sorry about that music there. Just trying to add something in the background and it just popped in.
And then I can bring those guys back together, see how that looks. It's not too bad. Yeah, I still got to get rid of this right here. There we go. And then I can just smash these two together. And I do that by selecting them both and doing Command E. And now that's nice and fixed there.
Nice.
And yeah, that's kind of it. So we got our inking all done up. There's a few things that might have kind of changed from when we had the sketch, just because I'm spending more time with it. So I got to figure things out a little bit more and leave it less to kind of guesswork. But that's essentially kind of our sketch. And then I've also kind of done the type up a little bit just to have that sitting there in the corner. Definitely with type, if you're going to add type to an illustration, make sure you do it in the sketch phase, right? Don't leave it to the end, because it can often be this thing where it's like, where does it fit? It doesn't fit anywhere, and it doesn't go anywhere, and like, where do I put it? And it becomes an afterthought, and that's glaringly obvious in most cases. So yeah, definitely, if you're going to put type in there, I think that's something that you need to think of from the kind of the onset of a piece. Otherwise, it's definitely going to cause some issues later on. Cool. So
Yeah,
we're ready to add some
sorry,
color.
that's like super interesting. Yeah, because like putting it into the sketch phase is not something I would have necessarily expected. I would have thought we do the illustration, make sure it all looks good by itself, and then later add text. But you're obviously saying it is part of the composition. It is
Absolutely.
It's part of the illustration. It needs to be. They need to
100%.
consider. They need to be considered together, which means
Yeah.
you should be doing that at the very beginning.
And look, it's not impossible to to do it after the fact. It just makes it a lot harder. It's like, if you know there's going to be 6 people there, book a table for 6. Don't book a table for 4 and then try and find out at the very end when 4 people are there, like, hey, can we fit 2 more people here? Like that's always going to potentially cause some issues. So I think it's just like, if you know you're going to do a thing, plan ahead for it and make sure that that's there from the onset.
Yeah.
It's also one of those things, I think I tell all my students this when, like, and this is more, I guess, like a graphic design thing, but I definitely have to consider this often when I'm doing like posters or whatever, for like illustrated things or that have like a piece of type on it, is always with any professional brief that you get, start with the mandatories. Start by putting in the things you know are going to have to be in there, because you're going to have to contend with those things no matter what. There's nothing worse than doing like an amazing illustration, or that you think is amazing, and then it's like, oh man, now I got to put these things. I got to put a barcode, and I got to put like, like a net weight, and I got to put a logo on there, and like, man, where are these things going to go? There's nothing worse than like feeling like you're just ruining and shoehorning things on top of it. Put those things in first. They need to go in. They have to be there. So stick them in there, and then work your illustration around it. It's a lot easier doing it that way, because your illustration doesn't have to look a certain way, whereas a logo, a type, all those things, they need to be a certain thing, especially if you're working in branding. So yes, I think that's always a kind of just a good idea, good practice to do that and save you some potential headaches later on. So we're good for color now. And as you see, I've done a new layer group. We just called it Coles. You can see this one underneath here. I don't know if you guys can see that. That's obviously my for later. Here's what I prepared later.
Nice.
And then I've just done orange, and then we're going to start with some orange. So this is where also the reference for the tiger here will be super handy for me. And literally all I'm going to do is I'm just going to make these selections and fill all the bits that need to be orange will go in orange. Also, again, same thing, like if I go over the mask here or the goggles, not the end of the world, because I know I'm going to make a layer later on with the goggles that will be on top of it. So anything that happens here is, who cares?
What was the shortcut you used then to fill that in with your foreground color?
So once I've got a selection done, and again, this is where the nice kind of thick anime lines are really handy. Once I've got that done, Option or Alt, Delete, fills with the foreground.
Nice.
And if you can see, if I'll switch to another color on the background like this. So I've got orange in the foreground, this is like teal in the background. If I do another selection and then Command Delete, it fills with my background color.
Nice.
Make sure, this happens to me quite a bit, and thankfully Photoshop has many undos, but make sure you actually hit the command, otherwise you'll just hit delete and like clear that selection and whatever's in it, which is never fun. But yeah, so for instance here, like the gloves, I know that I'm going to put a glove color on top of that. So the holes in the gloves, I can just do this, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to like, be careful and put all those kind of colors in there separately.
Yeah, I love the
So
thick. I love the thick lines, kind of making this part of the process like super quick, right? And then you're
yeah.
getting to get all the colors down, and then getting to play with them a little bit. So we have another question. What is the reason you're using Photoshop versus Illustrator? And I'll preface that by saying, yeah, a lot of people. I mean, we've had this conversation years ago, Jeremy, like where people might see your work and think, oh, you must use Illustrator because it can sometimes have that like Illustrator look because of the big thick lines, because it
Yeah.
almost looks like, oh well, it must be vector, right? But yeah, do you want to talk on that Photoshop kind of versus Illustrator
Yeah.
in your workflow?
So the main idea is basically the best explanation that I can give for it is that as much as Illustrator is an amazing program and I do use it for other things, I just don't like it very much. That's the main kind of reason for it. That the reasoning behind it is purely personal. It's not because it's a bad program or anything like that. It's literally just because I'm not comfortable using it. Um, but I use Photoshop mostly because I feel like it's a lot more kind of immediate feedback when you're using colors. And you'll see what
Mm,
I mean in just a sec where, so you can see that I'm doing this obviously in green, or this kind of like teal color, which is not wise. The reason for this is because I've had to turn the orange layer off because I've given myself indications on the sketch here as to where the white parts go on the sketch. Um, and if I'm filling this with white on a white background because I've turned the orange off, I don't see what I'm doing. I can't see what I'm doing. So I'm using a kind of a standby color, if you will,
mm.
that I will then replace later on, but it's just so I can see what I'm doing. And then in a second, I'll show you how that looks with this. And this is one of the things that I use the most in Photoshop. And it is this option here. So Command U or Control U brings up the hue saturation panel. And this then allows me to play with all these different colors and kind of start to have fun, which you can do in Illustrator. There is a recolor artwork, which is super handy in some scenarios. Like it actually beats some of the functionalities that Photoshop has, but it's not immediate. You need to do the
Mm.
thing and then go back to your
Then
artwork
go
and
back
see how
in,
it turned out.
and then go
Whereas
back
this
down,
is
back in.
like
Yeah.
as you slide it around, it's showing you what's happening. So this is a lot more kind of, it's a lot better if you're just trying to sort of explore colors and see what's happening with those colors. I much prefer the way that Photoshop kind of uses those colors as opposed to Illustrator. So that's one of the kind of the main reasons. But also, I think um, for me, Illustrator it's an image building program. It's not really a drawing program.
Mm.
And I think one of the main keys of that is that in Photoshop, you've got so many different ways that you can make a line, that you can draw a line. Whereas in Illustrator, there's only kind of a few of those, and they don't have nearly as many functionalities as Photoshop does. So yeah, I feel like if you're doing painting or illustration by hand, all this kind of stuff, it feels a lot more like drawing to me than Illustrator does.
Right.
Um, that said, I'm aware that, I guess, for lack of a better word, I probably should use Illustrator because it's better. And like, whenever I'm working with things like screen print, for instance, and you have to do color separations,
Yep.
these are those times where like I rue the day that I decided to work in Photoshop versus Illustrator, because Illustrator
Right.
is so much more practical at doing that kind of stuff, at producing
Mm.
artwork, than Photoshop is. So yeah.
Very cool. That.
Let's pop in a different color background here. So again, this is me just kind of like making all these different colors and seeing how that looks. And again, for this, for instance, like sometimes I've got a specific color palette in mind that I want to work with. Obviously, we're working with orange here, so that's going to set the tone for a lot of the stuff. I already know in my brain that I probably will have the hoodie be purple just because it's complementary to the orange, so it's a good offset. It makes the orange stick out. But other than that, I'm not sure. So this background here, I'm just literally just gonna to colorize, lower the lightness here, boost the saturation, and just kind of like mess around with this until I kind of see something that I like or that like meshes well with the rest of my work, if you
Mm.
will. Which is a little bit kind of counterintuitive, and a lot of people are just like, how do you pick your colors? Like, I kind of don't half the time. I just like accidentally stumble upon them, I guess.
Yeah, you kind of like play around until it starts looking good. Do you
Yeah.
think that's like from experience? Like, is that something that you would suggest like people new to like design or illustration? You know, you can do that kind of out of the bat, or do you think it's because you've messed around with color and illustration like so many times that you have a good idea of like what works and what doesn't?
A bit of both.
Bit of both.
Bit of column A, bit of column B.
Good answer. I guess yeah, that's it, right?
um,
Like I guess it's hard to know as well at that
well,
point.
so the thing is like doing this way can be really good because it can kind of broaden your horizon of colors a little bit, if you will.
Mm,
Of like, that's an unexpected color scheme. I would have never thought to have done that, right?
right.
Which can definitely can happen and can be very limiting if you know from the onset which colors you're going to use. The likelihood of you reusing the same colors again and again is going to be increased, um, which isn't necessarily a bad thing per se, but it's nice every now and then to just kind of explore different things or have a look at different color schemes that you might not have known were out there and so on and so forth. And it's just it's a nice way to have to gain some experience with color. So it's a good way to start. And then you can come full circle to like, it looks like I'm just kind of doing random, but
Mm,
I know what I'm like. I will know what I want when I find it.
yeah.
I'll know when I see it, kind of thing. That definitely comes with experience. But the idea of just messing around with colors until you see something that works, I think, is a great way for you to learn new things in terms of like what works and what doesn't work.
Nice. That's cool.
Um, how are we doing for time? We've got a bit of time left.
Got a little bit of
Um,
time left. I got a couple of questions for you as well.
yep, shoot.
Any tips on shadows? Like, how do you know where they go?
So let's skip ahead here, and I'll show you guys a couple of different ways of working with shading in here. So again, like I'm just adding in these colors. I've got the purple of the hoodie in there, and we did layers for the pants. Sometimes I'll do all these layers in one go. Other times I'll do them separately. It's just so that then I can come around and just go like, hey, you know what else works here? Like maybe I haven't thought of something else and explore this. And maybe it's all like desaturate this and it's kind of like military jungle tiger or whatever, and play with the camera print. So that will just definitely happen on its own as we go along. But let me just get rid of this for now and jump to the kind of the finished product or finished-ish product, right? So this is all the colors now as they stand in. I've added in a few different kind of things here that we can kind of talk about. Let me get rid of this actually real quick because I'll come back to this in a sec on how to do that. There's a little trick to doing that. And I'll have to fix this guy here, because I did him after I fixed my tiger.
After you fix it up before. Oh, that's super cool.
Okay, so shading on this, and where shading goes, I think is always a little bit kind of funny to think about, because it's definitely like something that I still kind of struggle with a little bit sometimes. And it's nice to kind of look at reference when you're doing this kind of stuff to see like, oh yeah, okay, cool, shadow falls on a face like this or whatever. Mostly what it is just the sense of, I guess, basically kind of 3D shape awareness, if you will, and trying to get something that makes sense. The way that I think about it usually is kind of imagining kind of snow falling on something and how that would look, right? So What we've got, the basic explanation of this is something like this. If we've got a sphere, right? And then like snow's coming in this way, then obviously the snow will collect on something from here. And all of this will be a little bit more covered in snow.
Right.
If we've got like a ledge like this, for instance, like a wall, then a ledge, and then a wall, and the snow's coming in like this, we're going to get a little bit of snow here, lots of snow there, and then a little bit of snow. So like this is essentially going to happen the same way. And so what I like to do is, again, I've grouped these all into, we can turn off our sketch now actually, into one group. And I need to add in just a couple of things here on top of this just to finish this off before I jump in. I'm really keeping you guys in suspense over how to do the shading.
Master of suspense, yeah.
But yeah, very important things to do here to finish this off is the shine on the eye. So this is going to go on a separate layer because it needs to go above everything else. And it needs to be able to be kind of manipulatable later on. Especially if you're going to make like a GIF of this and like you just make these eye shines kind of vibrate a little bit and shake. That's going to be a lot easier to do if they're on a layer. But you can see immediately like the difference in like the life that it brings into this piece and like makes these eyes look like they're coming to life a lot more.
Like a bit like they're glassy compared to before.
Yeah, totally. Which is exactly what you want. And then obviously we also need to do our whiskers. And so again, this is why you'll notice that the white of my tiger here is actually not white at this stage, which might not have been obvious from the get-go, but the reason for that is that then I can come in with the white of the whiskers and they do actually stand out.
I think Johanna did ask a question about that earlier that I didn't get to, which was why is it not a perfect white? And there you go, the answer.
Okay, so shading, two different ways to do this. One is kind of something that I used to do and don't do anymore for reasons that you'll see. So the first one is take the entire group of colors that you've got here, duplicate that. We can get rid of this one, that's the old one. Duplicate it, and then Command E is going to merge that all into one layer. And then I can do one of two things. I can go in with my Command U and drop the darkness of this so that it basically matches all the different colors that are in here, right? So basically what I've got is a different kind of color version just with all the same colors, but darker. And then I can put a layer mask on that. And if you see, if I just kind of split this down the middle, you'll see that kind of, that's kind of what I need to do. The problem with doing it this way is, well, the problem with coloring it this way to begin with, you never would just want to take, shading is not just color plus black. That's one of the basic fundamental principles of shading that the Impressionists taught us, is not just like, hey, just take a color and just add black. You want to add a slight tone to something, right? You want to make sure that something is a little bit more kind of tonally correct. So I'll show you actually the difference in between the two. We'll do one where it's just going to be minus light, so basically adding black. And the other one where obviously we're going to add, we're going to darken it, but we're also going to add some saturation and maybe kind of mess with the tones a little bit more. And what you can see is the difference in between the two is going to be pretty dramatic in terms of how much kind of fidelity that shading has in one versus the other. Right, so here we go. So this one is just like the shadows just look desaturated and just kind of a little bit muddy, whereas the other one, we've actually got still a bit of color in those shadows. We haven't just killed all the shadows in that color, or the color in those shadows, for instance, sorry. This one just feels a lot more natural in there. So always kind of adding in a little bit of color to this is definitely going to be key. The problem with doing things this way is that later on, if I'm like, oh, you know what, actually, let's add in another little kind of piece of gear hanging off his kind of, you know, baseball bat here, or like his club, and do that. Because I've done that after my merge, my shadows won't apply to this guy because they're not on this layer. Right? If I turn this layer on here and turn the mask off, you can see that that's not there. So basically the issue with that is that anything that I do later on in my drawing, I need to then go back and redo the shading layer. Whereas the smart way to do this is to take this group and put an adjustment layer on it. So this is down here. This little.
So can you show us where that is again? I just had the camera over it. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yep, right here.
Yep.
Click on that and then scroll down to the same menu that we've been playing around before, which is the Hue Sat menu. And then we can do the same thing. So this is going to do it to the whole layer, but you'll see also why this isn't a group in a sec. And then we're going to mess around with the color a little bit to just get color back into that. And then we're going to click this guy right here, which says only apply to the layer or to the group immediately underneath it. So our background circle and kind of pink, a green circle, sorry, and a pink background don't get affected by this adjustment layer. The nice thing about this is that I can come back in and mess with this as much as I want. It's an active, like non-destructive thing. And it comes with a layer mask as well, so that I can then come in and do some cutouts to this. So again, the nice thing about this is that this isn't adding any artwork. I haven't created any new artwork. So if I come in with a different color now to this and like come in with some more of that, and like, let's say like, oh, you know what? Let's give him a second tail because he's a crazy alien space tiger. And you can see that the shading is already applied to this.
Right.
I haven't lost that. So this is a much nicer way to do things, to add in an adjustment layer rather than to kind of smash them all together and put that as a shading option.
That's cool.
So
yeah,
that's
that makes
how
heaps
I
of
would
sense.
do that these days for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, and then it's just a matter of me blocking out the shading. So first of all, we're going to have to identify a light source. I'm going to say that the light source is coming from like up here. So this is kind of like top left. And so I need to think about like this kind of stuff and like 3D thinking of, okay, so definitely these goggles would be, the top of these goggles would be in the light. So they will be kind of there. This is where also I can see that my thing probably needs a little bit more darkness so I can differentiate in between those two areas. We're going to come in here and just block this out a little bit and see how it all kind of looks. And the nice thing about doing this on a layer mask is that nothing is committed, right? Like I haven't committed to anything at all here. If I see that I've screwed up, I can just go, oh, you know what? I need to bring some of this back in.
Right.
That's not working, or maybe kind of bring that in underneath there and see how that kind of looks. So literally just kind of painting in. I can do it with my selection tool. I can do it with my paint tool and my paintbrush tool, sorry. There's a bunch of ways that I can do this that will make sense for me later on. But yeah, essentially that would be me just kind of like figuring out where all this lighting is coming from, how it's probably or probably not falling on my drawing, where it's hitting, where it's not hitting. And there's definitely going to be some trial and error here for sure. But yeah, see like these ledges, for instance, like they would be catching the light. So that's a good way to kind of showcase that. The light's probably catching away from this. So make sure that that's on. Bring some of the color back into the tail here, like that. This fist is catching all the light as well.
It's really cool. So it's like kind of made everything dark and then you're painting back in the light, which is really cool because doing it that way, especially in an adjustment layer where it's not, you know, as you said, it's not permanent. You can always just add or subtract until you're kind of happy with it, and you can even come back later and make changes. It's just a really freeing way. And you also have access to all of the tools when you do it this way, right? Like sometimes you can use the selection tool. Sometimes you might use you might even use a feather. Like if you want a bit of more of a diffused kind of look, you could use a feathered
Yeah,
brush and kind of
100%.
bring in some like texture and stuff
So
like
like
that.
I could do this, right? Like I could make a selection if I was into this kind of stuff, which I'm not because it's not really my style, but also because it's a lot harder to work with. But if we're looking at like a basic gradient from black to see-through, what I can do here is I can come in and go like, let me make this into a gradient shadow,
Right.
right? And that creates this kind of like gradient effect on this. So that's completely, a way that I can work here and do that without having to kind of worry too much about things. And it's all completely um, changeable, and it's all, what we call non-destructive, as in like I haven't committed to anything. I can always come back
Mm.
and undo things, so nothing is permanent, nothing's been destroyed. Um, which is I think probably the best way to work, and it's one of the things that they teach you in design schools is like work non-destructively, so that you don't have to commit to anything when you're doing your artwork, and you're not risking like, hey, client coming in with a change, like, oh, I know we said we wanted this, but now we want the other thing back. Can you bring it back? It's like, oh, nope, because I worked destructively. That can't happen now, and that's always a bit of a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think it's the name of the game these days is to always work non-destructively. Because even
Yeah,
if it's for yourself or if it's for a client or whatever it is, I think we've all learnt over time that having to redo something from scratch or go way back through or redo something is incredibly difficult, especially if you're, you know, billing hours and suddenly you can't charge the client because you should have built it in that way in the
yeah.
beginning and things like that. So it's
And
just
that's
the
definitely
way to
not something
work.
that you should build for a client, right? Like if it's something that you didn't plan for,
Mm,
then that's on you. Like you gotta own up to that, and just you can't bill the client extra for that because
yeah.
you made a mistake.
We have a few minutes left, maybe a minute left or
Yep.
something, maybe
Cool.
two to wrap
Um,
up.
all right, let me just add in some text in here real quick and show you guys how I would just kind of do something like this. So let me add in this 22 because it's 2022. It's already set to this cool, like, typeface here
Nice.
that I kind of liked. I'm going to change the color of this one to my yellow here. And then I'm going to resize, rotate. Oops, actually, before I do that, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to rasterize this so that I can actually warp it. Then I'm going to
Cool.
rotate and rescale. The reason I rasterize this before doing this is that I can then keep my rectangular bounding box. And which
Okay.
means that when I warp it, it's actually going to warp to the bounding box rather than the other way around, which is basically this is going to happen. If I do this, if I rotate, hit return, sorry, and then rasterize and do see how my bounding box now is not what it should be, like it's
Mm,
outside the thing. So it just makes your life a little bit harder to do that. So it's a good idea to rasterize first, rotate, rescale, holding down shift, so that it's in line with that. And then you can do your distortion there
nice.
and add in your 22 like it was painted on the bat.
That's cool. It looks great with the shadow there as well. And like to illustrate your point, like before you added something in and then the adjustment layer is already doing everything over the top. So it doesn't matter where you move it, it'll still kind of have that same effect with the shadow.
Yeah.
You have to redo the shadow or bring in the line again, and then you can just move it around freely, which is super cool. Have we got one more question that we probably have time for? Was your Shiba piece in reference to anything in particular? I think that's the one that we had for the artwork.
The
Was that
one
a that
in
was a
the wrong
previous
one.
piece, right?
Yes, yeah, that's just me, like, because I like ramen, and I think it was in the middle of summer, and I was like, I miss a wintry ramen, and so I felt like doing a little Shiba eating a bowl of ramen in the snow. That's the extent of the brainwave behind that.
That's where that comes from.
Yep.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Check it out. Look at this piece. It's so nice. This is super cool. I love this little guy. He's very cute. But yeah, so it is year of the tiger. just going to take over this for a second. So you can create your own artwork. If you're in one of these countries, mostly Asia Pacific countries, there is a competition happening as well. So you can create your own tiger artwork, upload it there, check out the details there. Basically, you just use the hashtags and everything like that. You can win an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription and $1,000. So check it out. It's going on for the next couple of weeks. We hope to see yours there. Jeremy said that he would post his up there so we can check it out. Thank you all for joining us for Adobe Live. We'll be back again next week. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for hanging out with us.
Thank you, Flynn, and thanks everybody. Thanks for the questions. It was really good to be here.
See you guys.
See ya.